We're pretty accustomed to analyzing conflicts through, the lens of military maneuvers, geopolitical chess, or abstract political status. But today, we are going deep into a different kind of war, one that's waged systematically and strategically on the very earth beneath our feet. Our sources today paint a really compelling and frankly disturbing picture where environmental destruction isn't just collateral damage. It's a systematic, calculated policy, which they actually term eco-kulunum, or eco-slaughter. We are diving into excerpts from a really crucial interview with Fatoş Göksungur. She's the co-spokesperson for the newly formed Europe Kurdistan Ecology Movement, which is known as TEV-EKO. This movement's formal declaration came right after a workshop in Freiburg, Germany back in December 2024. And their foundational philosophy, well, it really demands that we rethink everything we think we know about political struggle and environmentalism. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission here is to understand why this movement views the environmental struggle not as a secondary or, a niche concern, not as some green side project, but as the absolute foundation for building a free, democratic society. We need to see, in pretty painful detail, how specific, tangible examples of environmental destruction are being used. We're talking about the flooding of ancient cities, the weaponization of rivers.
The burning of forests.
Exactly. The burning of forests, the theft of heritage crops, how all of this is meticulously woven into these broader political, military, and demographic strategies. Strategies aimed at displacement and really cultural erasure.
That framing is so critical because it immediately challenges our standard sort of Western definitions of what conflict even is and what environmentalism is supposed to be. What's so fascinating here is that we aren't just discussing, climate change mitigation or conservation projects. The core philosophy driving TEV-EKO is really encapsulated in this radical statement that ecological struggle is inseparable from the struggle for women and democracy.
And that raises a huge question right off the bat.
It does. It immediately sets the scope so much wider than typical environmental activism. It positions the environment, the health of society, and gender freedom as these mutually dependent, interconnected systems. In their view, if you damage one of those pillars, if you allow the physical environment to be systematically destroyed, then the whole structure of a free and democratic life just collapses immediately.
That principle of inseparability, that's the engine room of this entire movement, isn't it? I mean, we can't really understand the specifics of the eco-curum policies without first grasping that philosophical foundation. The interview makes it very, very clear that their entire framework rests on a major paradigm shift that was established around 2005, and it's centered on this idea of democratic modernity. And this isn't just a policy blueprint. It's designed to be a fundamental rethinking of how human civilization interacts with both itself and, the natural world.
Indeed. And to understand why those three elements are linked, you really need to get their critique of what they call capitalist modernity. They argue that the global system, which is driven by the logic of profit, centralization, and the state, is fundamentally rooted in systems of hierarchy. And this hierarchy, they say, historically it began with the domination of women. That then led to the domination of society by the state. And finally, that resulted in the domination and exploitation of nature.
So their solution, this democratic modernity paradigm, it has to address all three roots of that domination at the same time, not one after the other.
Precisely. This paradigm is explicitly built on three fundamental legs. They act as necessary preconditions for existence and freedom. First, a truly democratic society. Second, a women's freedom-centric society. And third, an ecological society. They see them as completely interdependent forces.
I think that connection is what demands the most unpacking for you, our listener. I mean, we can kind of grasp that ecology and democracy are linked, right?
Yeah.
A poisoned land can't support a free people. But why is the women's freedom component considered a non-negotiable prerequisite for the other two? That's the part that might be less intuitive.
Well, if we look at the intellectual synthesis that's provided in the sources, the argument is it's profound. They state that a failure in one area actively undermines the possibility of the others. So if you don't dismantle the oldest form of hierarchy, which they argue is gender domination, then that same authoritarian logic will inevitably permeate the state structure, which undermines democracy.
Right.
And crucially, it will reinforce the view of nature as something to be subdued, controlled, and exploited, which of course undermines ecology. So a truly democratic society must therefore be ecological. It has to operate in harmony with its environment and reject that logic of domination.
And a democratic society must be centered on women's liberation.
Exactly, because anything less renders the democracy partial and, in the end, unsustainable.
So the clarity here is that any environmental movement that ignores the social hierarchy or the political structure is doomed to fail. because it's just treating the symptom, the pollution, or the deforestation, and not the underlying disease, which is domination.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the understanding that the ecological struggle is viewed as the most fundamental defense of society itself. If the environment is systematically destroyed to displace populations or to serve state military objectives, I mean, if the very foundation of life is attacked, then democratic participation and social continuity are actively destroyed right alongside it.
This isn't some theoretical worry for them.
No, not at all. It's the daily reality that drives the urgency of this movement. And the systemic connection provides the context for the leader's assertion, which is cited in the source, that the ecological struggle must be the most radical form of struggle against state war policies.
That's an incredibly weighty statement.
It is. It asserts that defending the land, the water, the forests, it isn't just a secondary priority. It is, in fact, the most effective and radical way to resist systematic state aggression.
Why, though? What's the logic there?
Because the state's most effective weapon for severing the bond between a people and their land is ecological destruction. So therefore, if you make the defense of the land synonymous with the defense of society and culture, you completely transform the nature of the resistance.
It transforms the traditional political conflict. It's no longer a struggle over borders or abstract rights. It becomes a very physical defense of life itself. It makes the fight for the local ecosystem the ultimate act of self-defense. That framing really sets the stage for the systematic detailing of what this eco-cocoon actually looks like on the ground. Our sources highlight Kurdistan as one of the areas where these policies are most intensely observed, and they cite the context of a 50-year conflict. And here's where it gets really interesting. These actions are not described as random accidental damages from, military skirmishes. They are described as systematic, integrated policies designed to achieve political, demographic, and security goals through environmental degradation. The environment is the weapon.
And the long-term strategic impact is horrifyingly clear. The source mentions a 50-year conflict that has led to the forced evacuation of thousands of villages and the displacement of millions of people. And crucially, the spokesperson links this directly to the ultimate policy goal, severing the Kurd people's bond with the land. This is a profound and deeply strategic point. Displacement isn't just about moving bodies from point A to point B.
No.
It's about destroying cultural continuity, traditional knowledge systems, and that deep-seated relationship between people and their traditional ecology. When that bond is severed, the entire social fabric, which is so deeply rooted in the land and its resources, is permanently altered. And that makes return and self-governance vastly more difficult, if not impossible. Okay, so let's look specifically at the element of water. The sources identify it as both a security and a demographic tool, a perfect illustration of eco-coutume.
And we're not talking about small rivers here.
Not at all. We're talking about the Dikil and Fırat, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Historically, this river system has the potential to sustain Mesopotamia and, you could argue, the entire Middle East. Yet these vital, life-giving water resources are being strategically weaponized through massive dam construction projects, a policy that's often referred to as hydropolitics.
And this manipulation of water, it has devastating, culturally destructive, visible effects. Our sources give us these concrete, just heartbreaking examples of ancient historic cities and villages that have been intentionally flooded by these massive dam projects. And they're often rationalized under the guise of, energy production or security enhancement.
We have official justification.
Exactly. And just think about the scale of this cultural erasure. They specifically name several crucial sites being lost to the floodwaters. Asanke, for example. The source notes it's one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited settlements. We're talking 12,000 years of civilization.
12,000 years. It's almost impossible to comprehend that.
Then there's Zeugma, known globally for its incredible Roman mosaics, Samsat, and the ancient villages surrounding Urfa and Helfeti. These aren't just, random villages being submerged. These are millennia of human history, complex archaeology, and cultural continuity being deliberately buried under hundreds of feet of water.
It is strategic amnesia, enforced by hydroengineering. This perfectly illustrates the eco-coutume policy, using environmental modification, in this case the massive redirection and containment of water, as a direct non-military tool for cultural, historical, and demographic transformation.
How so?
By erasing the physical markers of history, you weaken the claim and the identity of the people who are connected to that region.
And this policy has significant international and regional implications, right? It extends far beyond the immediate dam sites.
Oh, absolutely. The source connects the water policy to broader Middle East conflict strategies. Water is explicitly being used as a weapon against Rojava in northern Syria.
And this is despite Rojava being a vital agricultural center.
A critical one. It's known historically for wheat production and seed preservation. Truly, a critical breadbasket for the entire region.
And yet, water is being withheld and restricted, which leads directly to food embargoes.
This is where that inseparability principle comes into such sharp focus. This is a classic example of using ecological leverage, specifically the lack of water, to enforce political and military objectives that have nothing to do with generating power in the immediate vicinity.
It's pure strategy.
Pure strategy. By controlling the flow of the Euphrates, you are directly crippling the agricultural output of Rojava. If a community can't feed itself, if its seeds and its ancient farming practices are threatened by drought and embargo, its ability to achieve self-sufficiency, democratic autonomy, and stable governance is just shattered. Water management transforms into a tool for siege warfare and demographic control.
It transforms a natural resource into a strategic asset for a siege. If you control the water supply of a region known for its grain production, you are effectively undermining the basis of life in that region. You're crippling its ability to establish a free, self-governing society. And this ties directly back to their core ideological linkage. Destroying the ecology is synonymous with destroying the possibility of a free, democratic society. Now, moving from water to land, we see an equally cynical and destructive policy regarding land use. Our sources describe this remarkable paradox. You have areas that are designated as special security zones or military restricted zones, where civilians are strictly prohibited from entering.
Right.
And yet, counterintuitively, these very same areas are being opened up to large-scale resource extraction. And critically, this extraction is often driven or licensed by state actors or their affiliated corporations.
It's a textbook example of using security as a pretext for economic exploitation. It's a classic bait and switch. The state uses security as this kind of iron cloak to evacuate and isolate the land from its traditional inhabitants, the very people who have generational knowledge of how to use that land sustainably. But once the indigenous populations are removed, the land is immediately sold or licensed for destructive industrial exploitation, all while remaining completely inaccessible to the public.
The change in usage is devastatingly detailed in the source.
It really is. Traditional pastures, often used for animal husbandry and grazing practices that have sustained the ecosystem for literally thousands of years, are now being converted into these large-scale industrial projects. For instance, the source mentions the conversion of ancestral grazing land into GES solar energy system fields.
And on the surface, solar energy sounds environmentally friendly.
Of course. But the process of seizing ancestral communal grazing land for large, often foreign-backed, state-controlled industrial projects that fundamentally severs that indigenous ecological relationship the community has with the land. It prioritizes centralized energy production over community livelihood and ecological compatibility.
And it gets worse. We hear that the military zones, once cleared of inhabitants, are also open for intense mining operations and HES hydroelectric power plant sites. This just confirms the integrated nature of the EKO policy. On one hand, the government is conducting demographically motivated policies aimed at displacing the Kurd population, often through dams that flood valleys, and on the other, it's simultaneously applying mining and HES licenses within these secure cleared zones. It's a policy that simultaneously changes the demographic structure and destroys the natural landscape for profit.
It creates a vicious cycle. The conflict justifies the military exclusion zones,
Which then facilitate the removal of the population.
Exactly. The military exclusion zones facilitate the removal of the indigenous population. The removal of the population then facilitates environmentally destructive extraction projects. And these projects, in turn, degrade the land, making it even harder for anyone to sustainably return, which cements the demographic change. It's a closed loop. And the source points to current, highly visible destruction in specific regions. We see intense mining operations cited in Shernuk operations, which fundamentally alter the landscape and the water tables. And then there is the comprehensive devastation and plundering of nature noted across Dersim. This isn't localized, isolated damage.
No, it's described as a comprehensive, region-wide exploitation strategy.
A strategy that leverages the ongoing conflict to facilitate resource extraction and landscape destruction, ensuring the land can no longer sustain traditional life. And that brings us to the third major component of eco-curum detailed in the source: the deliberate and strategic burning of forests. This is defined as a dual act of destruction. It is obviously the destruction of nature itself, but equally importantly, it's the elimination of endemic plant diversity.
Right, it's not just the trees.
Not at all. When forests are burned, particularly under the pretext of clearing cover for security forces, you don't just lose trees, you lose the unique genetic material, medicinal plants, traditional food sources, and the overall biodiversity that has sustained life in that specific region for millennia. You destroy the ecosystem's resilience.
And the sources provide a powerful, highly symbolic example of this type of cultural and economic sabotage: the Efren olive tree incident. The source emphasizes the highly symbolic and economically significant act of stealing thousands of years old olive trees from Efren. They call it the theft of Efren olive trees.
And that detail, theft, it speaks volumes about the intent, doesn't it?
It does. The olive tree is not just a source of fruit or oil. It's highlighted for two critical reasons.
Sure.
First, it's a crucial source of livelihood, anchoring the local economy and the traditional social structure. And second, the source stresses that it is an ecologically compatible organism, meaning its traditional cultivation method actually supports the local ecosystem rather than harming it.
So to target, cut down, and steal these ancient, ecologically compatible trees, it's an act of profound cultural, economic, and ecological warfare. It targets the very basis of their self-sufficiency. And framing this within the broader context of the eco-cunyum policy, the source makes it explicit. This policy targets air, water, soil, and all living creatures. And it's all conducted under the pretext of war and security operations. Whether it's bombing the mountains, forcing migration, flooding historical sites, or burning forests, the unified strategy is to render the natural environment hostile, unusable, or simply non-existent for the indigenous population.
This is not carelessness.
No, it is the calculated use of ecological violence to achieve demographic goals. And the final result is the physical displacement of the people and the severance of their bond to the land, which they identify as a primary goal of the conflict.
Given this level of systematic destruction, the necessity for a specific, organized response, one that's dedicated explicitly to the ecological dimension, it becomes painfully clear. And this leads us to the formation of the Europe-Kurdistan Ecology Movement, TEV-EKO. The source explains that the realization emerged that ecological organization was severely insufficient within the broader political movements.
And this insufficiency arose because of a heavy, often unavoidable focus on traditional political and status issues.
Right, the immediate needs.
The immediate, urgent need for political recognition and protection often overshadowed the slower, less immediately visible dimension of eco-cunyum. Despite the war conditions having a clear environmental component, the urgency of political status just pushed the ecological struggle to the margins.
And this marginalization was keenly felt in Europe, where the movement primarily organizes. The spokesperson noted the unique challenge of organizing outside of the immediate conflict zone. In Europe, the political status struggle could easily become abstracted, or, as the source puts it, isolated from the ecosystem. Organizing around abstract political rights without grounding that struggle in the physical reality of the destruction of Hasankeyf, or the burning of the forests, meant the movement risked becoming disconnected from the very land it sought to defend.
And crucially, the movement's origins are rooted in a powerful moment of internal self-criticism. The source mentions that TEV-EKO originated partly from an awareness of a very insufficient approach within previous organizational structures, like KCDKE.
Which is the Congress of Democratic Societies of Kurdistan in Europe.
Correct. They admitted they were failing to prioritize ecological issues in their activities, and for not making ecology a core part of the agenda during their period of co-chairmanship. And this is a vital detail. It wasn't just an external need that drove the formation. It was an internal recognition that their existing, predominantly political framework was inadequate to tackle the crisis holistically, especially given the gravity of eco-cunyum.
That internal review spurred the action that's detailed in the timeline. The decision to form an ecology committee was made at the KCDKE Congress in 2023. And by July 2023, the committee-level organizing began in Europe, starting with a dedicated, though small, group of just 5 people, and then growing outwards.
But the critical philosophical differentiator, which sets TEV-EKO apart from other general environmental movements operating in Europe, is its specific focus. They're focused on organizing in the field of social ecology, or toplumsel ecology. This is why we spent so much time on that three-pillar system earlier.
Right.
Social ecology is a framework that explicitly rejects the notion that environmental problems can be solved merely through technological fixes or lifestyle changes. It asserts that nearly all ecological problems are rooted in deep-seated social problems, namely hierarchy and domination.
So, if they are focused on social ecology, they are inherently connecting the destruction of the natural world to issues of class, power, and political structures. This means their fight against a dam isn't just a fight to save a river.
It's a fight against the centralized state power that decided the river was theirs to exploit in the first place, precisely. It brings their entire political struggle back to the land. This approach dictates that environmental movements must be revolutionary movements, aiming to reconstruct society along democratic, egalitarian, and ecological lines. This makes their mission inherently political and ideological, and that sets them apart from groups focused solely on conservation or pollution remediation.
And the culmination of this foundational work was achieved pretty quickly. By December 2024, TEV-EKO was formally announced and established at a major workshop in Freiburg, Germany. It brought together activists organized under the umbrella of KCDKE, so within just over a year, they moved from a self-critique in a small committee to a formalized, ideology-driven movement with a specific radical focus ready to campaign internationally. And this formalized movement now has a clear, four-pronged operational strategy. It's designed to tackle the crisis both locally, among the diaspora, and globally within the international movement. The first principle is focused locally and internally, raising awareness of social ecology as a lifestyle and understanding among all Kurdistan people in Europe.
So it's about changing minds at home first.
Exactly. This means pushing beyond simply political awareness. It means integrating that three-pillar paradigm into their daily lives, within their community councils and their management structures. It's about building a grassroots awareness that ecology isn't just a political talking point. It's a lived necessity, a foundational shift in how communities interact with resources and with each other.
The second principle then turns outward toward the European political arena, which is key to their strategy, bringing Kurdistan's eco-Kurum policies onto the political agenda in Europe and campaigning against them. Europe is a major theater because it holds political and economic sway, and it's often where international attention is most easily gained, or frankly, most easily distracted by abstract political battles. The goal here is to ensure that these specific acts of environmental destruction are politically visible and unacceptable to European institutions and publics, thereby challenging the states that are conducting the eco-Kurum.
Their third principle aligns their efforts globally, linking their regional struggle to the larger world crisis. Aligning with global ecological movements to combat the worldwide ecological crisis driven by capitalist modernity. They recognize that the specific destruction happening in Kurdistan, the expropriation of land, the domination of nature, is a localized manifestation of a global pattern of exploitation.
Right.
So by linking their local fight, the theft of olive trees, the damming of the Tigris, to the global fight against capitalist-driven consumption and modernity, they broaden their base, and they provide critical context for their conflict.
And the fourth, which they call the most important principle encompassing all the others, is fundamentally ideological. Sharing the leader's ecological society paradigm, both globally and internally, and turning it into a fighting consciousness. This is about exporting their foundational three-pillar concept, ecology, democracy, women's freedom, and making it the ideological engine for action, both within their own movement and among international allies. This ensures that the movement remains philosophically grounded and never loses sight of the connections between social hierarchy and ecological destruction.
It's clear that the ambition is vast, but the spokesperson, Fatoş Göksungur, offers a degree of self-assessment and humility.
Yeah.
We see this in their acknowledgement that their current impact on creating sensitivity against eco-Kurum policies is still very insufficient. That's a powerful point of honesty.
It is. They know the depth of the issue requires a scale of response they haven't achieved yet. However, the important caveat is that they are acting with full awareness of this necessity. The difficulty of the task doesn't diminish their commitment to persist. And this recognition informs their immediate focus, which relies heavily on digital and public campaigns moving forward. But the immediate, core issue they're prioritizing is the ongoing embargo on Rojava.
And this campaign brings together the ecological and political strands seamlessly.
It really does. Let's delve into this specific point, because it represents the nexus of current eco-Krium policies. Rojava is cited as a critical agricultural hub. It's a center for grain and wheat production, and an important location for ancient seed preservation.
So a region with high agricultural productivity and strong potential for self-sufficiency.
Exactly. And yet, water is actively being used as a weapon, coupled with a food embargo.
And the mechanism is just terrifyingly efficient. By controlling the water flow from upstream dams, the capacity of this region to irrigate its essential crops and thus feed itself and achieve stability and democratic autonomy is intentionally crippled.
Yes.
The struggle against this water shortage and food embargo is therefore the most vital and immediate ecological and political struggle they face, because the lack of water threatens to wipe out the social and democratic structures being built in Rojava.
It connects every single point we've discussed. It is environmental destruction, water manipulation serving political and military ends, the embargo and siege, and it's aimed at crippling a society that is actively trying to implement their democratic and women's freedom-centric paradigm. If the agricultural foundation is destroyed, the whole social project fails.
So what does this all mean for the future vision? The ultimate hope, which is tied to the democratic society process, is for a transition period. They envision a time when the destructive policies that treat essential resources, water, food, seed, trees, olives, and nature itself, as hostages and tools of war will finally cease. The entire goal isn't merely to return to the status quo. It's to construct a radically ecological life built on a more democratic foundation, one that prioritizes genuine societal needs and ecological harmony over political or military gain. It's a fundamental reimagining of the relationship between state, society, and nature.
So, to summarize this extensive deep dive, the source material really compels us to look at ecological damage in a new light. Eco-Kenyan policies are presented not merely as environmental damage or, pollution resulting from conflict. They're presented as integrated strategic tools for war and demographic change. These policies intentionally target the cultural, historical, and economic roots of the people. They sever their bond with the land through displacement, through flooding historic sites like Hasenkif.
And stealing traditional, ecologically compatible crops like the ancient Afrin olive trees.
Exactly. It's all part of the same strategy.
That's the big picture takeaway that TEV-EKO is trying to internationalize. The environmental movement that's detailed here is explicitly and fundamentally political. It views the calculated destruction of the natural world as a direct attack on democracy and societal freedom. The defense of the environment is simultaneously the defense of a women-free, democratic, and self-sufficient society. The core linkage is non-negotiable. If you do not have an ecological society, you cannot sustain a democratic one.
And this systemic perspective leads us directly to our final provocative thought for you to consider. If, as the source material suggests, water, soil, and historical sites are being treated as hostages in a long-running conflict, strategic tools to enforce political goals and maintain domination, what does that imply about the long-term definition of peace? Is true lasting political status or resolution even possible without first restoring the fundamental ecological foundation, reversing the eco-Krium, and healing the people's bond to the land?
Can any peace be sustained if the environment remains a weaponized asset and a hostage of state policy?
It forces us to ask, is ecological justice the essential precondition for political justice?